Welcome, I'm Laura, that's Science Fairy, here today to talk about the brain science of learning. Educators the world round strive to enhance learning, right? So in this article, A.J. Giuliani introduces us to the work of Peter Nielsen. And Nielsen is what I'm going to riff off for your benefit as I focus on STEM learning for young children. The article he wrote, Mr. Giuliani, is called Understanding the Science of Learning and Our Role in the Process as Educators, right? So if you can stay with me for at least 10 minutes, I'm going to give this little STEM spiel, and talk about the 4 different processes of forming a memory. First, attention. Wow, don't we struggle with this one every single day? But attention, when we break it down, comes to 2 things. There needs to be interest or necessity. And I find this interesting working with children because they're naturally curious. They're interested in a lot of things for the most part. And this is because that's what's keeping them learning, because children don't know what they need really out of their own brain, out of their own thought process. It's part of growing up and becoming an adult. What I do find is that when we do group STEM activities, there's a much better energy because the children are taking turns with something, and if another child is already paying attention to something, that then becomes a necessity. And children perceive that and will fight for their turn to get a new experience. Because everything is new and not necessarily known, interest is key. And because of that, we look at the concept of curiosity. And children have a lot of curiosity because they're actually seeking something different than what most adults seek in their working life, right, is novelty. And novelty will stand out to us as adults, but as children, there's a lot of things to think about with novelty. And so they're seeking out those new experiences, and that's where STEM can come in and provide experiences that will support later learning. So what does that mean with later learning? We also have to focus on the attention of the brain, right? Here's our brain. And when children are at play, they're engaging their brain. So if I'm playing with this while I'm learning about circles, for example, I'm learning about circles and I'm thinking about it metacognitively. I'm thinking about my own thinking because my thinking is creating something in the physical world that I'm actually having, the back of my mind is having to lift and hold. So I'm listening and I'm doing this engaging work. I also find it interesting that when you see children actively engaged or just engaged, they can be doing an activity, but like us, they double task. And this is something I worry about in STEM education in general, is that a student will be focused on what they're doing, but they're allowing that autopilot drive to do this while they're listening to what the teacher's saying, because the teacher might be talking about them. And I have issue with that teachers talk about young children in front of young children in their earshot, assuming that it's just adult conversation and they have no point listening. And that's a very strict stroke, because when those are bad comments, that becomes a tape in the child's heads. If they're good comments, whatever the child's doing, they're getting that affirmation, they're going to continue doing that experience. So we're negating experiences by saying, oh, that kid just doesn't pay attention. So be very careful about those tapes that we put in children's heads. Next up, we need to talk about The Cognitive Science of Education by Nielsen. That's Nilsson. You can find online. And he has a 14-part free series, and it's called The Cognitive Science of Education. And in that, we also talk about the other 3 components of memory formation. The first one is going to be encoding. Encoding is how your brain takes the information and gets it in there somehow. Ta-da! But if it's just one big lump and it's not connected to the neurons in the brain, the encoding isn't going to stick. So we have to connect it to prior experience or prior knowledge. Working with young kids, I like working and asking questions. For example, if we're about to use something with a motor on it, I ask, can this go? Does this have electricity? Still don't get it. Is it plugged into the wall? Should it turn on? Now, children understand about outlets, about cords, about switches, which they're going to encounter more often, and the activity and what that motor does is going to be connected to those memories and allow for encoding into the brain. Also, storage. Storage is an interesting thing. How do we get this to stay in the brain? So you have all these neurons, and a newborn has the most number of neural connections, and those neural connections reach out to any connected thought and hold on to it. And once it's in that way, it's stored. Now, it can be negated by the brain's process during sleep. So the brain during sleep prunes through the connections that no longer make sense, which is kind of why our dreams make no sense, because those dreams are guiding those pruning mechanisms to which thoughts are not going to serve us well. So that storage process is a question of surviving the pruning rate of the brain. So the more connected something is in the coding, the harder it is going to be to get rid of that neuronal connection. That is the outpacing of the brain. Also, we hear in this point the storage struggle with kids with disabilities or disorders, and how that can affect the biology and the chemistry of the brain, whether that's environmental toxins or structural differences in the brain. And so when we think about brain science and teaching brain science, we also need to be thinking about how much more effective we can be for kids with disorders of the brain. So we've got encoding, attention, encoding, storage, and last is retrieval. So the question with retrieval is it stored in multiple encodings? Is it stored visually? Is it stored eidetically? Eidetically means the smell. So if you're doing a salt and vinegar experiment, have those children smell the vinegar and have them associate, what does it smell like? Oh, it smells like pickles, yeah. So I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to remember pickles are acidic in their vinegar. And that's going to stay in the brain. And it's going to retrieve in the brain when they smell vinegar again. And so the eidetic smell is the strongest type of encoding for memory in the brain. But there's other ways to do it, and we struggle as teachers because we usually do that visually and auditorily, sometimes with the body and motion and physically. But it's important to have those multiple codings, and also when we have multiple codings, it allows the brain to have that connectedness to do innovation. And that innovative key is really where we're asking the next generation to have the discoveries of the future. So I look forward to learning with them with that. So lastly, some STEM learning philosophies. We need that stickiness of all the neural network. We need sleep, quality sleep that keeps the right memories stored that are going to serve us well. Some things we just don't end up remembering, but we know we can look them up, so hey, that's good. Lastly is technology. Now that we live in an information age where all that information is right there on your phone, it's going to be a lot easier to store information. It's the question of how good is our retrieval and how good is our encoding on the quality of that information. So technology, we can use brain science better, and for that I recommend the course by the author of this article, and that is going to be Mr. A.J. Giuliani, and it's called 10 Research-Backed Ways to Boost Learning and Performance. Very timely course that he's got there. So now that you've paid attention visually and auditorily to me for this period you've been stuck with me, I'd like to review how better we can apply cognitive science in our practice as teachers, coaches, and leaders. So we have the 4 stages of the brain: attention, what keeps that, encoding, storage, and retrieval. So we have a role in the STEM process in the learning of the different components and concepts of STEM, and we'd like to explore these as a basis for education, using the brain science we already have to support what we do in the classroom. And as we talk more about, sorry, someone just came home. As we talk more about our STEM and how that's going to be related to early education, I'm going to be putting together a series of these spiels. And spiels is a Germanic word for the word play, because concepts learned through play are about 100 times more effective than direct instruction. So I hope you get to play with some Play-Doh and think about the brain and enjoy some STEM leaps and bounds in your classroom. Peace out.